welcome back to our channel. I'm Akshara, Brand Communication Specialist here at AECC, and you are watching another episode of Know Before You Go. On today's episode, we have Tiffany Hardman, Director of Partnerships USA for AECC. Tiffany comes with over 10 years of experience in the field of international education. She has worked not just with universities but also with international recruitment agencies. And on today's episode, I will be talking to Tiffany to understand USA as a destination, as well as discover answers for some of our most asked questions from our aspiring international students around the world. So make sure you watch until the end. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to get notified every time we upload a new video. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, Akshara. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
So, thank you so much for joining us today. We have a bunch of questions that have been pouring in from prospective international students all around the world, especially when it comes to studying in the US, because it's such a popular study destination. There's so much opportunity in terms of learning as well as for, career.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really love working with international students and helping them get to the US, achieve their study dreams. So I'm very excited.
So, as someone with extensive experience in this field, what are some of the key advantages of choosing United States as a study destination for international students?
I think there are quite a lot of advantages, but I'll limit it to what I think are kind of my top three. So first of all, I would say the number of institutions that you
Mhm.
have to choose from. So there are over 4,000 higher education institutions in the U.S. So
Oh,
whether you're looking for a really large school, a public or private, something really small or niche, if you want to be in a campus where there are a lot of activities, or if you want something a little quieter, like no matter what your interests and needs are for the
mhm.
kind of environment you want to be in, that exists here. So the variety of different institutions you can choose from is immense, which is really nice. And then I would say number two would be the locations within the US that you have to choose from. So if you want to go to school in a big city, or out
Mhm.
in the country or in a small town, you have those options. If you want to
Yeah.
live near the mountains, the ocean, a forest, again, a very urban center, you have those choices. So your living experience can really vary, but
Mhm.
because there are so many institutions and across so many places in the US, you can
Mhm.
really find the exact kind of experience that you're looking for in terms of your campus and living environment. And
Mhm.
then number three, I would say career preparation, or like the
Mhm.
hands-on training that you can get in the US. So there are internship opportunities, there are volunteer opportunities. You can really get a lot of experience outside the classroom, and institutions really advertise what their level of involvement with that is. So you might hear that an institution is like a top tier research institution. So if you want to be involved doing research, no matter what your discipline is, you have those opportunities. So I would say those three are kind of the top attractions of choosing to study in the US.
Yeah, so there's something for everyone. You have a whole buffet of options to choose from.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, that's cool. So, the very first step in a student's journey, when they move to a new country, even if it's not the US, but right now we're talking of the US. So the very first step of the process is getting their application through, is submitting the application to the university. So, can you give us an overview of the application process for international students who want to study in the US?
Yeah, so it's going to vary, of course, by institution and a little bit by level, depending if students are interested in studying at the undergraduate or the postgraduate level.
Hmm.
But the basic process is you'll always need to submit an application form online. There may be a fee associated with that, or you may have access to a fee waiver. So that's something to look out for. And you'll definitely need to submit your education record. So transcripts, basically, if you're looking at the easiest way to summarize it is that you want to send the most kind of up-to-date
Mm.
academic record that you have. So if you are currently in secondary school, you're going to send everything you have completed up until that point. If you are currently in an undergraduate program and you're looking to study postgrad, you'll send your current transcript as well. If you've completed a degree at the time that you apply, if you maybe take a gap year or take some time off to work or
Mm-hmm.
things like that, then you'll submit a finalized academic record from whatever your most recent completed degrees would be.
Makes sense.
And yeah. And then now we get into kind of like the optional application items, depending on what the institution that you're applying for is looking for. So test scores at the postgraduate level, it would be GRE or GMAT. At the undergraduate level, it would be SAT or ACT. A lot
Yeah.
of institutions are test optional now,
Mm-hmm.
but if you have taken one or both of those exams and you would like to submit them, even the test optional schools will accept them. They just may not
Mm-hmm.
be required. So it's important to kind of monitor your checklist.
Mm.
And then typically you're going to have to submit some kind of English proficiency as well. So the
Yeah.
TOEFL or the IELTS Duolingo English test is accepted pretty widely now. Most of the
Yeah.
institutions that we work with, for example, are accepting the DET as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then PTE is another one that's, I think, a little bit less common. And then you might have to submit like a writing sample. So at the undergraduate level, it's typically an essay or two. At the postgraduate level, it might be a statement of purpose, plus or minus your CV as well.
Mm-hmm.
You may be required to submit letters of recommendation. Those are often optional, but some
Mm-hmm.
programs or some institutions require one or two. And
Okay.
then depending on how the institution's process works at the application stage, you may be required to submit proof of financial support as well,
Yeah.
so that when you hopefully receive an admit letter, you're automatically able to receive that I-20 as well.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
amazing.
then it's important to make sure that you understand kind of how the deadlines and maybe scholarship
Yeah.
or financial aid works.
Yep.
Some schools offer very flexible deadlines, which is nice, but they may have stricter deadlines for you to be considered for aid.
True. And I believe most universities also have, 3 months advance from the, for the deadlines.
Yes, most of the time you're going to need to apply, yeah, 3 to 6 months in advance, depending on kind of the how competitive the school or the program you're looking at is.
Mm.
Earlier would often be better,
Big
but
step. Yeah.
a typical timeline, for example, if you're looking at the fall of, let's say, fall 2024, since we're in the summer of 2023 right now,
Yeah.
applications won't necessarily open until about August, maybe even September in some cases of this year. So you can only apply up to a year in advance. Whereas
Mm.
for like spring entry, if that's an option that the institution offers for international students, that might be open in August, but it closes in October. Whereas the
Mm.
fall schedule is more like opens in August, closes in February.
Yeah. You have a pretty big window there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And fall intake, of course, is the most popular. So
Mm.
it's the longest opportunity to apply, and it's
Yeah.
typically the biggest term, but it really just kind of depends on the school. But it's always better to be prepared ahead of time as best you can.
True. Yep, I agree. And so I have this question. So most universities, I believe, do need the students to have at least one of the English, tests with them. So what's the minimum requirement, the score or the
Oh
band?
boy, that's gonna vary a lot, but I think for most undergraduate, I would say the TOEFL would hover between about 60 to 70. It just depends on the
Mm-hmm.
school. That would be the minimum. IELTS is going to be then about 6 to 6.5.
Mm-hmm.
Overall band score, sometimes they have more specific requirements of like, your average has to be 6, but you also can't dip below like a 5, for example.
Yeah.
Um, Duolingo English test, I think that equates to about 100. I'm not sure.
No worries.
Um,
Okay.
but at the graduate level, it'll be a little bit higher. So TOEFL might
Mhm.
be 70 to 80, IELTS might be 6.5 to 7,
Yeah.
DET more like 110 to 120.
Got it. Got it. Okay, so the next question. What advice do you have for international students regarding the necessary documentation, deadlines, and requirements for applying in the United States?
My top recommendation would be just to make sure that you understand what those items are, and that so for example, you know which term you're planning to attend, and therefore you can kind of back up when you need to apply based on those generic kind of timeframes that I provided
Mhm.
for fall or spring. Specific dates will vary, of course, for each institution, but that's a pretty good guideline to consider. Um, so making sure that you know what your requirements are, what your deadlines are for the schools that you're considering. An easier way to kind of manage that is make sure that you kind of like shortlist yourself a little bit more, because it's a lot easier to keep track of 3 to 5 dates and deadlines and required documents lists versus like 10. So doing your research ahead of time is helpful to kind of narrow that down. And then
Mhm.
I recommend keeping all your documents well organized. Get them
Yeah.
prepared ahead of time and have them well organized. You don't want to be running up against a deadline trying to ask for a letter of recommendation if it's required, or trying to finish up your statement of purpose or your
Yeah.
entry essay or anything like that. A really good way to do that, of course, is to work with our counselors. They can kind of help you keep all of that straight, and help you best understand which institutions kind of fit your needs.
Definitely, I agree. And the best part is all of our services are absolutely free of charge. So make sure you click the link in the description and get in touch with our counselors today.
Yes.
Yes. So, as an international student, one of the biggest factors that's going to determine, or, it's a decision making factor of my journey is going to be the financial aspect, which, to be honest, it is going to cost them a little bit. It is expensive. International education is not cheap, but it's definitely worth every penny. So, how does United States support international students when it comes to navigating the complexities of tuition fees and, financial aid opportunities?
So there are a couple kind of generic, like overarching truths that we can talk about, and then I'll talk about some specific examples that institutions are kind of leaning into a little bit more now. As you said, it's an investment. It will cost some money, but of course, we want to make sure that students understand their own budgets and what that means kind of for their overall experience. So it's important to um, understand not only what it costs to attend in terms of tuition, but also the overall cost of living
Exactly. Yes.
in the area, which can really vary in the US,
Mm-hmm.
um, as well as understanding that across the length of the degree. So 4 years for undergrad, typically 2 years for maybe a grad program.
Mm-hmm.
Most institutions have admission staff and or financial aid staff that students can speak with directly. A lot of times they will be able only to get kind of general information depending on how far along in the process they are. But eventually, as it gets closer to a time to make a decision, students will be able to understand from most institutions a really specific um, budget that they have to consider.
Mm.
So they'll be
Yeah.
able to understand their financial aid package if they've qualified for anything, and what the difference between kind of the sticker price, their financial aid, and therefore like what their actual costs will be
Yeah.
for 1 to 4 years, depending on their experience. Um,
Mhm. True.
but from institution to institution, even if you have that kind of guidance, the answers will ultimately vary. So it's important to kind of understand the bottom line across all of the institutions that you're considering.
True. Yeah.
Um,
And yeah.
so sorry. So
Yeah.
to kind of help with that, because it can be really complicated, institutions are trending more toward a higher level of transparency. So they want students to understand what the tuition is, what all the fees might cost if they're a place that charges fees. To kind of help out, some places have done away with fees. So they are kind of building those costs into the overall tuition. And then you don't have
Mhm.
any kind of what they call like surprise expenses or just kind of less predictable expenses.
You
Um,
pay what you see.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of that information is just available online as well. So if you're just kind
Mhm.
of in those early stages and you're not ready to talk to anyone yet, a lot of that information is just going to be available for you on the admissions or the financial aid page of the institution that you're looking at. But do be aware of the cost of just tuition versus the full cost of attendance and like what you would need to show in order to be able to receive that I-20 to be able to apply for your visa, because those numbers are going to be different. So you want to make sure that you're factoring all of that into your budget and having a conversation with the right people on campus to understand that. And
Mm-hmm.
then in terms of some maybe tactics or kind of like trends in the industry for students to get a better understanding of the complexities of financial aid and overall costs and things like that, a lot of schools have moved to what's sometimes called a fixed tuition guarantee. So
Mm-hmm.
they will guarantee that the tuition, so let's say again, you're looking at fall 2024 and tuition is X amount. They will promise you that if you enter for fall of 2024, your tuition all 4 years will remain what it was fall of 2024. So they
Oh,
won't increase tuition for anyone who enters that year. Now, for people entering fall 2025, they might see a tuition increase from the year before, but then
okay.
they'll be guaranteed that all 4 years or both years, their tuition remains the same. So that's kind of what if you see that kind of phrasing like fixed tuition guarantee or net tuition guarantee, that's what that means, is that even if the cost of tuition increases, either
Mm-hmm.
yours won't or the school will compensate by increasing your like merit scholarship by the
Mm-hmm.
same amount. So again, at the end of the day, your bottom line stays the same.
Interesting. That's actually brand new information. I had no idea that institutes change their, fee in the second or third year of the program. I was under the assumption that you join this particular, let's say 2024 fall, and that's just going to be the fee for every for the next year until you graduate.
Yeah, it's way more common now that that's the case. But like when I was in school, for example, again, many years ago, tuition might increase every year, and that became a concern for domestic and international students, of course, because it's
Mm-hmm.
harder to budget. But this newer policy at a lot of institutions allows students and families to really understand their budget across the length of the degree versus just the first year, knowing it may increase some the next year. So it's a lot easier to plan long term when that's the case.
So, since we are on the topic of finance and money, could you tell us a little bit about the scholarships and financial aids that international students have from the US government or from universities?
Yeah,
The
so
general and
there
easily accessible ones.
Yeah, definitely. So there are a couple different kind of categories of aid. So the most common, I would say, is merit-based aid, and
Mm-hmm.
that is awarded by the institution based on your academic performance. So typically, schools will require some kind of minimum GPA. They
Yeah.
may require a combo of a minimum GPA plus a minimum test score if they
Mm-hmm.
require tests, or you may be able to submit optionally for more aid, but they are based strictly on kind of your academic performance and those numbers. Um, Often students are automatically considered for these awards. So at a lot of institutions, they don't have to submit an additional essay. Uh,
Mm.
it's not a competitive award. Like if you get one, someone else doesn't. It's just everyone that meets this minimum gets this offer.
Hmm.
But there may be additional competitive scholarships available for academic merit as well. So
Mhm.
for those, you might have to stick to a strict deadline, submit an additional essay, submit test scores if you're at a test optional institution, things like that.
Mhm.
Second big category is need based aid. And this is funding that's provided based on a demonstrated need. So it kind of depends on like whoever your financial sponsor is, typically parents, but other family members or family friends or anything like that. Um, if they're not able to pay or if they have kind of a cap at what their budget is, but you're really very well qualified to go to this, institution XYZ,
Mhm.
they might provide need-based aid to kind of help bridge that budgetary gap that your family can't meet.
Mhm.
That's a bit less common for international students, especially. And if it does happen, it's a little more common at private schools. So if you're really budget conscious, there's kind of a general understanding that public schools are going to be a little less expensive than a private school. And for the raw tuition number, that's often true, but private schools often have more aid that they can provide.
Yeah.
So you're looking at, sticker price versus the aid that you receive, leading to your bottom line. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Often,
Yeah.
somewhat surprisingly, the private school offers a lower bottom line because they're able to provide more aid. So
True.
don't rule out any particular type of school without kind of running those numbers if that's something that you're concerned about, because you never know where that bottom line will land.
True. I mean, private schools, they do have a bigger budget because the tuition fee is comparatively higher.
Yes,
So
yeah,
they can afford to hand out scholarships or financial aids.
yes. And they
Yeah.
typically receive more like donor funding as well, like
Mm,
alumni
true.
donate
Yeah.
more. Um, and more frequently, and they're able to be a little bit more they can kind of set more of their own criteria for scholarships. So particularly if you get like a donor funded scholarship, a lot of times those have very specific criteria, like you may have to be an engineering student, or you may have to be an engineering student from Southeast Asia. Like it can get really specific because the donor
Yeah.
wants to fund a specific type of student that they want to help. So sometimes those can be a real advantage for students if they fall into that category.